Nomad Session, a wonderful brass and wind octet. So he's a musician here to interview our composers and enjoy. I'll let you take it away, John. Actually, since we only have 2 mics, can I have you sit on the end and they can share?
Of course.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Right, good evening, everyone. And it is on. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm very excited to ask these 2 wonderful composers these questions. So let's dive right into it. The first question I have is for both of you. Could you tell us a bit about your backgrounds, your journey towards composition, and the work of yours we'll be hearing tonight? Let's start with Sheila.
I'll take this. It's on? You can hear me, yes. Well, that's a long question, and I'm going to try to make it short. I've been a composer since my early 20s, and I was a pianist as a child. Started piano lessons when I was first grade, like 5 or 6 or whatever that is, and always did music. Didn't do composition per se. It wasn't really in the realm of my awareness as a young girl growing up that women could be composers, but by hook or crook it came out, and then I followed it through. And my life as a composer has gone through many phases. I think if I look at my overview of my work, I always wanted to be an opera composer, but getting operas performed is always a challenge, as you can imagine. One of my early works, The Thief of Love, was an opera I wrote in the early 80s that I just thought, write an opera, you get it produced. Well, it wasn't, I waited until 2001 to see it on the stage. But in the meanwhile, I wrote, concert music. I've written chamber music and orchestral music. And the last 10 years, I've gone back to my love for the voice and for opera. And the songs you're going to hear tonight are fairly recent pieces, and I am currently working on an opera based on Khaled Hosseini's novel A Thousand Splendid Suns, which is to be premiered by the Seattle Opera in 2020. And that's a long journey, and I'm in the middle of the orchestration. And before I started to write the opera, I decided I needed a warm-up piece, so I wrote a set of songs based on Enna St. Vincent Millay's poetry, which I really, really loved, and I called it Beauty Intolerable, which was the name of a poem that actually one of her lovers wrote about her. And she was quite the supreme early feminist of the first half of the 20th century, and totally irreverent and totally, I think, speaks to women today very strongly. She spoke to me. And the second song On Loving is actually the first Edna St. Vincent Millay poem that I ever set. So that started me on a journey. And it belongs, it's actually the set On Loving, which was written in memory of a dear friend, was written over a fairly lengthy period of time. It starts with the Shakespeare, and then it moves to Millay, and then it's Khalil Gibran. And they were written at least each of them a year apart. And but the middle piece, the Edna piece, became the first of 14 songs I wrote in the songbook. So I've been focusing on the voice for quite some time. I have also a lot of pieces that deal with political issues, like Twilight Gleaming, which was about the Iraq War, but could have been about today also. And I've read a lot of pieces I've written like Moon Prayer and Midnight Prayer, the idea that that we're seeking. I like prayer in terms of beseeching the universe for peace. I mean, they're all based on that. I wrote one of my early, and I think rather one of my best still pieces from the early 90s is To the Spirit Unconquered. It was inspired by Primo Levi's writings on the Holocaust for a piano trio, and it's probably my most performed piece even to this day. And so, you go through periods, and I've had lots of periods, and it's a very rich experience to be a composer, and all the wonderful people you meet, and all the, every piece is an obsession, and the research around every piece is an obsession. So it's totally always enriching.
Thank you. Jonathan?
To offer some background, some biographical background, I began playing and studying and writing music when I was about 18, as I was finishing high school, or the summer thereafter. However, throughout my youth, I had always been fascinated by music, always been very curious about it, and particularly curious about the people making it, and composers particularly. For one reason or another, I always felt like instruments or something were too expensive. I couldn't afford one or this or that, and so that's one of the reasons why I began at 18 and not sooner. But it was always in the forefront of my mind, and something that I was very passionate about. And composing felt like a sort of natural, well, it feels like a compulsion, really. I don't think I could give it up. I'd be the most depressed person you'd ever meet. So it always just felt like it was something inherent to my own personality, to my own identity. So I was drawn to it immediately as soon as I started playing music, and was pursuing it sort of on my own at first, and then ultimately I went back to school, and initially I was studying architecture and night courses, and just wasn't, although architecture is fascinating, it just wasn't really moving me, and I felt like there's something missing, and it was music. And so I was attending a community college with open admission and open enrollment, and changed my major to music, and began preparing for auditions at university level. And from there, just kept pursuing the study of music, making music, composing music. And with regard to the piece tonight, I'm in my 5th year of grad school at UC Davis, and when I entered the graduate program there at the Department of Music, I knew that I was going to be researching and writing about pardon me, about music and politics very generally, but specifically protest music. It's something that I've been fascinated by for years, and knew that I wanted to pursue that area with my PhD. But what I didn't quite know initially was that I was going to be writing a lot of protest music and pieces that have a socio-political impetus driving them. And this is one of those pieces. In my first year, I was kind of shy about engaging in these kinds of topics with my music, and deliberately vague, because I was worried I might alienate people or what have you. But quickly, I realized that there's no need to be shy about this, and to be direct, and to embrace it, and to keep pursuing it. It doesn't mean that each of my pieces goes this direction, and in fact, as if you read the program note with tonight's piece, I didn't anticipate it. When I set out to write this piece, I didn't anticipate it being, having a political charge, but being very abstract and very general, and having the ability to be perceived in a number of different ways. And I struggled with that a lot. I found that while I thought it was going to be a relief for me to pursue a piece that way, it actually wasn't, particularly with regard to, among all kinds of bad news, but seeing, families traumatized and separated from one another and detained at the border and stuff like this, I realized, no, you have to keep pursuing these works that speak to something very specific. And
So to
I
stay
did.
in that vein, you've mentioned that some of, or most of your works have an ontological impetus. So specifically in your string quartet, you mentioned that you contemplated violence when writing that piece. How do you put that in music? What is your process?
So that's a great question. So essentially, there are a number of things that I'm considering with that, and one is, you know, our response and our reaction to violence. Violence itself, you know, there are a number of things, but trying to capture the essence of this is what I'm after. And one thing that's been has been a big inspiration for that work in trying to deal with how we think about violence and how we're related to it, and what it might mean if you have a sort of if you have a spiritual identity, how that also affects the way you think about violence, and the paradox of so many people finding a relationship to a higher power, but also, you know, violence is such a mainstay, such a presence in human nature. So one of the artists who has been inspiring me to pursue this and to look for ways to treat it is Cormac McCarthy, and particularly his book Blood Meridian has been a big inspiration. So part of the process, one thing that I've been after is trying to sort of mirror the structure of his novel in my work, and have that be a sort of a cornerstone in going beyond thinking about form and structure in these raw musical materials into how do we respond to if we, you know, how might we communicate musically with sound, what one might think about just some of the most heinous violence you might possibly imagine. But that was the starting point.
Sheila, you mentioned earlier that you are currently writing an opera based on the novel A Thousand Splendid Suns. Could you tell us more about that and talk about how your approach to vocal writing might be different between writing songs and writing for an opera?
Yes, I can do that, I think. Well, I have to follow through on his comment first about violence, because I don't know, has anybody here read the novel A Thousand Splendid Suns or seen the play? I think the play's been done here in San Francisco. Got a lot of violence in it. And so I had to ask the question, we all had to do, you know, how do you deal with violence literally on the stage? You know, I didn't want it, you know, I'm kind of glad they never made a movie out of it, because I could just imagine how much violence they would put in the movie, and it would just be awful, I think. So there's a lot of violence in it, and yet you don't want to turn the viewer, you don't want to make them, you know, you don't want to make them uncomfortable, but you have to also have enough violence to feel okay in the end when she kills the bad guy. So, so when you're writing opera, everything is serving the characters and the development and the flow and the drama, the pacing, everything. It's all about what's happening to the character at this moment, what are they feeling, and you're telling a story. And I'm, you know, some opera composers like to tell a story that, like, I mean, you look at Tristan, there's hardly any action, right? And you sit there for hours just taking in the feeling of it. And my model is much more like Tosca. I happened to see it yesterday, it was wonderful. And I like action, you know, one thing keeps leading to the next, so you're really moving as fast as you can. To the point where I'm always asking myself, how long do I dare linger in the because you don't want the opera to be 5 hours long. And I've kept, that happens to be a very long and complex story covering many, you know, it covers about 40 years of time. So and it's 2.5 hours, which is as long as I dare write an opera. So it's always a question of everything is about the story and the emotion, and it's also about, after the violence, letting the audience perhaps have a moment to breathe. When you're writing art song, I still think of them as arias. I think of the Edna songs, for instance, as 14 little arias, because each one is in a time and in a place, and it's telling a story. And in these cases, it's almost always her voice or a voice that's speaking. It's not a narrator, it's a voice. So if it's a voice, then it's the singer who is the character. And all of the poems that I chose to set were not narrative, but personal. I.e., I think of the song cycle as the many voices of Edna. And I think, you have to follow the structure of the poem. The poem has a structure. I try not to repeat things, although sometimes I break that rule. If this musical structure requires something, then I will, you'll notice that in the Shakespeare song you're going to hear tonight, the first setting, I chose to play with the oh. I mean, she says oh, as an exclamation, and I drew it out because it felt appropriate. And but it's formally different because you are completely. Usually it depends on the poem. If you're setting a poem, I mean, sometimes you're not setting a poem. Sometimes you're setting prose. So it depends on what you're setting. In an opera, you're still having to absolutely deal with the words. Of course, in an opera, if I don't like the words, I just change them. In a poem, I can't do that. So in fact, the structure is more rigid in a poem than in an opera.
Right.
But I don't think there's so much difference because you always need a kernel of the music in an art song that represents for you what the art song is about. And in any given moment of an opera, or any given scene of an opera, you need a kernel musically of the intention or the action or the feeling of the character that is informing the scene has to be related to what's going on. So you need still to have the music be about the subject.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you both for answering these questions. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but now I would like to put you on on a different kind of spot. So you're going to hear both of these composers talk about their works before they will be performed this evening. I have a few questions from the ensemble that I play in and the ensemble that I co-direct that will allow us to really get to know you just as people and friends. So we're going to do a quick flash round of questions. We're going to do a quick flash round of questions, and here's how it's going to work. I do not know the questions that my fellow co-directors of Nomad Session approved. They sent it to me in an email, and I'm going to open it, and I'm going to ask you both a series of questions, and we're going to go back and forth. So, Jonathan, you'll answer a question. Sheila, you'll answer a question. The point is for it to be as quick as possible, the first thing that comes to mind, and we'll see how it goes. Are we ready for this flash round? Let me pull up these questions. First, let's start with Jonathan. What's your favorite coffee drink?
My favorite coffee drink?
Mm-hmm.
Just drip coffee.
Drip coffee, perfect. Sheila, what was the first musical recording you purchased?
All 6 of the Bartok string quartets on Vox.
That's awesome. Nice. Very cool.
I was in high school.
Jonathan, favorite non-classical musical artist?
That's a tricky one, but I can definitely
You can name a
point
few.
to Neil Young as one of the top.
Yeah, I would very much agree, yes. Sheila, is it caramel or caramel?
Caramel.
Good. Excellent.
Wait. It's caramel flavored, but it's a caramel if you pop it in your mouth and eat it.
Okay. Jonathan, best museum you've ever been to?
Well, I was just at the Met in January. It was amazing.
Excellent. Sheila, Favorite dance movement of the Nutcracker?
Ah, da-da-da-dun-dun-dun-ba-da-yup, that one. What's it called?
Oh my gosh.
I don't know the name of it, but that's it.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll come back to you. You're putting me on the spot. Oh my gosh. Jonathan, if you could have dinner with any non-living composer, who would it be?
Oh wow, that's man. I don't know. Aaron Copland's always been a huge influence my entire life. Maybe say Copland.
Okay, and this is a question for both of you, just to wrap this up before I take audience questions. What's your favorite thing about collaborating with Left Coast? You can go into as much detail as you'd like.
Well,
However, we don't have
okay.
that much time.
Okay, we don't have much time. I'm delighted to be here. It's been fantastic. We heard the program the other night, so it's not a huge, we know what's going on, but I think it was really exciting for me to come here and hear songs performed that I had not coached, and to hear that somebody can look at all those dots on a page and come out with something really incredible, and in fact, a different interpretation than I'd heard before. So that's been really exciting for me.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. Just the virtuosity of the performers is at an incredibly high level, and so you can take stock in that and just trust that they're going to play your music very well. So that's that offers a lot of relief. But in addition to that, I've been familiar with this group for a long while, and I've been to a lot of their shows, and so it's incredibly exciting to be a part of one of the programs. Especially, this is a really good program too, and everybody's super nice too. Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much. We're really excited for the concert this evening. Are there any last-minute questions you might have out there for any of these two? Anything out there before we wrap up? All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining, and I would like to give these two a huge round of applause. Thank you so much.